Regrets. I have a few. Let's talk about them. Hey everyone, I'm Erin the Impatient Gardener, and I have gardening regrets. So I've been gardening in this garden for an amount of time I actually can't even wrap my head around. It's 23 years now since we've been here. And although I was dabbling in container gardening before we got this property, this is where I learned pretty much everything I know about gardening, or started learning about it in terms of a hands-on situation. So this is where I've made my mistakes, and I've had my successes, and it's pretty much all happened here. And I realized, looking back, there are some things I certainly wish I had done differently. And today we're going to talk about those. So I think that gardening, more than maybe most things we do in life, is one of those things where you learn from your mistakes. Like you make a mistake and you have really learned a lesson from it. So a lot of the things that I've messed up over the years, it's hard for me to say I'm regretful about them, because I learned something that made me a better gardener in the end. Most of these things are truly things that I regret and wish I could go back and do differently. My first regret is something that I've actually mentioned before, and this is right up there with one of the biggest ones that I have, which is not installing a deer fence from the moment we could have afforded it. So this is our first house and our only house, and like a lot of people who buy their first house, when we moved in here, it wasn't like we were sitting on a lot of extra cash to do something. I also didn't realize at that point how much of a big deal gardening would become of me. Although I was dabbling in, that is actually one of the main reasons we moved out of an apartment into here, is because I was getting so interested in plants. I could not have predicted just how the gardening thing would have sort of snowballed. But if I could go back and tell my younger self something, it would be, as soon as you have the money to do it, before you invest in any plants, or many plants anyway, put in a deer fence. My second regret, as I look back at how I've approached creating this garden, is that I regret taking on too big of a project at one time. I mean, with almost every single thing I've done in this garden, I could have broken it into chunks. And I think it would have been better if I had done that, because I go through these periods of very, very, very intensive work in the garden, and then I get super burned out. And then what happens when you get burned out, at least in my case, is then I can't even look at that. So then you fall into this cycle of I just need to take a break from that. But while you're taking a break from it, it's kind of you're losing ground. Weeds are coming back in, plants aren't doing as well as they should, and you're losing ground on it. Then you're like, I can't let that happen. So you go back to it. But now you're undoing some of the bad things you had done. And I think all of this could have been prevented if I had learned a long time ago to break things into chunks and do them in chunks. I think the best example of this is actually one of the newest gardens, is the one that I did in 2020. And let's just blame COVID for bad decision making on this. But that was basically the entire end of the driveway and the whole shade area. I mean, it was probably 25% of the garden space in this yard. And I tried to do that all in 1 year. And in fact, you may know, it's still not done. The shady area is still just a hot mess of stuff that I just throw in there, and really needs attention. I mean, I have kept it from going totally rogue and totally feral, but it's not what I want it to be. Shade gardens are lovely. It could be beautiful, and that's not what it is. And while this might vary from person to person, for me, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that it's much better for me to take the time and the budget that's allowed and make a really good space with as far as that time and budget will go, rather than taking that time and budget and spreading it over a bigger space. And then to plant one area really, really, really well and intensely, so that you don't have a bunch of weed competition that you have to go back and continue to manage. And I also think the advantage of taking a little bit slower approach, or tackling a smaller area at one point, is that you give yourself some space to make changes on the fly, which honestly, every single time I have drawn out a design or come up with a concept in my head, there have been changes on the fly, and it is always better in the end for having made those changes. So if you're not overwhelmed with such a big space, I think there's a little bit more mental space to make those changes that make for a better garden, just when you're standing out there working on it. Number 3 might just be more of a reflection of my personality, but I don't regret a lot of purchases that I've made for my garden, but the things that I do regret are cheaping out and buying the thing that I know isn't the thing that I want or really need, but it'll be good enough for now. In most cases, when I know I really want something, it's better for me to just wait and save up for it until I can get it, rather than try to make do with the cheap version of something. Invariably, I get mad at myself because it doesn't end up working or it ends up breaking, and then I have to rebuy it, and then I go buy the thing I wanted from the beginning anyway. So I've amassed quite a collection of tools over the years, and most of them are super high quality, honestly expensive tools. There are some tools that I don't feel like I need to buy the best that's out there. But in a lot of cases, like, I like my hand pruners, and like a certain kind of hand pruners, and that's what I buy. And I like a certain kind of gloves, so that's what I buy. And I don't regret spending money on any of those things, because I have never once thrown out any of those things. And I don't think I ever will. They're going to outlive me. Number 4 is a design related thing. And this is a lesson I have had to learn a few times over, but I think I've finally gotten it through my head, which is that I abhor wishy-washy bed lines. And when I mean wishy-washy bed lines, I mean, let's just do like little waves. I've designed at least, several garden beds that way. In every case, I have ended up going back, sometimes years later, and fixing that wishy-washy bed line. The garden is always better with a big, bold, curvy statement rather than a little turn here, because we don't want to make it too drastic. This probably falls under one of those lessons I've learned thing, but I tell you what, it kind of stinks to have to redo bed lines. It is not fun to have to recut beds and remove a bunch of sod and then move plants around to make it fit because you've made a mistake. So wishy-washy bed lines, that I ever allowed myself to get into that, I mean, just commit to it and go for it, because those wishy-washy bed lines, they never look right. And you know what? It looks like you just kind of slapped it out. It doesn't look like it was done intentionally. And I do regret the time I have spent fixing that wishy-washiness. Number 5 is a plant-related regret that I still find myself kind of leaning towards on occasion, and I continue to regret it every single time. And that is saving good spots for some mythical perfect plant that I think is going to come in and find that spot. This is the most absurd thing I probably do in the garden. There are spots, not as much anymore, but even as recently as a couple of years ago, right at the front of the bed, in the most prominent spot in the garden, that are sitting there with a big hole in them, because I know that the perfect plant is out there for that spot. I know something really cool is coming for that spot, and I'm going to save it. This is so dumb, because you know what? As you all know, we can move plants around. So put whatever plant you want there. If you find the mythical perfect plant, which, by the way, I've been looking for, I still haven't found it, you can just move that out and put that other plant in there. I think number 6 is a regret that many gardeners will admit to, and that is hanging on to plants that I don't like for way too long. The classic example of this that I use all the time is daylilies, which I hung on to in this garden for ages. Now listen, no shade on daylilies. Daylilies can be very cool plants. There are some really beautiful ones out there. People breed amazing, wild, cool looking daylilies, and I bought a lot of those kind of expensive daylilies at one point because I thought daylilies were the plant that was going to fix a lot of things. And you know what? It turns out I just don't like daylilies. They are just not the right plant for me. And yet I continued to have them in my garden because I had so many of them that it would have left a big hole. And then I would have had to find something else to fill in that hole. And you know what? When I finally decided to get those daylilies out of my garden, it did leave a hole. And I still liked it better than when the daylilies were there. I'm also guilty of hanging on to plants for too long because I feel guilty if I rip them out of my garden and then they go to the compost pile. And I know what you're going to say. Well, just give them to somebody else. You know what? Sometimes people don't want your plants. Sometimes people don't want your plants if you grow in a garden that's got Asian jumping worms, which I do. And sometimes you don't want to have to go through the hassle of trying to find someone to come get the plant when you're going to dig the plant. Sometimes you just want to be done with the damn plant. I really regret the times that I spent looking at a plant just because I felt guilty about pulling a perfectly good plant that I didn't like at all out of my garden just to toss it if I couldn't immediately find someone to take it. I kind of have a new rule for myself on this. If I don't at least like the plant, I mean, I don't have to love every plant in my garden. Not every plant in your garden is going to be worthy of absolute love, right? At least if you have a big enough garden. Like, sometimes you just have to have plants that do their job well, and you have to like the way they look doing that job. You don't have to love them, you just have to like the fact that they are doing what you put them there to do. But if I don't like it and it's just sitting there because it happens to grow in that spot, man, get the boot. Life's too short to hang on to plants that you don't at least like a little bit. Another regret that is rooted very much in hindsight, because I never would have seen this coming, is related to buying heavy equipment. For the last several years, we've been toying around and kind of keeping our eye out for sort of a subcompact little garden tractor that could dig holes and move stuff around and all those things. And as it turns out, those are very, very expensive things. And so we have not found one yet. And honestly, we're kind of at that point where we're like, well, do we even need it anymore? And while we'd use it now, when you look at how much money you would be spending to buy some of that, although I will say I don't think they ever lose their value, so it's usually a pretty good investment. We've done all the stuff we needed that for. We've rented those machines time and time and time again to use them for projects. They would have helped us so much on so many big projects that we have done here. And we didn't have it then. And I'm, for the most part, I hope, the big projects that we're going to do hands-on are kind of over. So while I wish I had that, because we would use it all the time for moving around firewood or cleaning out the woods or rotating the compost pile or digging a hole or you name it, we wouldn't get the use out of it that we would have if we had bought that thing 20 years ago. So that's another one where if I could go back and whisper in my young gardening self's ear, I would say, when you can afford it, buy the tractor, because you will use it and you will love it. This next regret is rooted, I think, a little bit in the fact that I just love gardens. I love gardens of all kinds. I love studying gardens and looking at gardens and visiting gardens and walking through gardens. And I don't care what style they are. I can find something I love in every single one, from the most formal garden to basically a giant wild meadow to a Japanese garden. And this is nothing new. This has been the case for me since I started gardening. And especially then, I mean, I was just pouring through books and magazines, and I still do, by the way. Those are my favorite sources of inspiration, other than actually walking through a garden. I was exposed to all kinds of different gardens that moved me. And I said, gosh, I love that. I would love to live within that. So there was a good amount of time in this garden where I was stymied by the fact that I couldn't figure out what kind of garden I wanted, because I loved all these other gardens. And how is a person supposed to decide whether they like the formality of a really tight boxwood hedge with hydrangeas falling over it, or a very tight design palette that is very restful, or an absolutely wild, colorful scene of all sorts of blooming things, or a very charming, cozy cottage garden, or a naturalistic garden. And I couldn't really move forward because I just couldn't get my wits about me to try to figure out what I wanted. And I thought that was really important. I thought, like, there is no point in doing this if you don't have a cohesive design style in mind. And then what I learned was, it's okay. It's your garden. So if you don't want to have one specific design style, You don't have to. And that's actually what my garden has developed into. But once I allowed myself the freedom to create gardens that didn't necessarily fit into whatever design style I thought my garden was, as long as there were unifying, cohesive elements that tied things together, it was so freeing. And I enjoy the process of tweaking and creating gardens so much more now, because I no longer tell myself, well, you can't have that kind of garden, Erin, because that's not what your garden is. No, you can have it. Just figure out a way to make it work with what else you have going on and bring in the same elements and some of the same plants to make it all make a little bit of sense. So yeah, I regret a lot of sitting around waiting for some sort of divine inspiration to come to me regarding what the design style of this garden should be, because if I had gotten over that sooner, I would have been having a lot more fun in my garden a lot sooner. It's interesting that I regret not planting some places, because another one of my really big regrets is not dealing with problem plants in a quicker fashion. This is a story I've told before, but there was this beautiful plant with these spikes of purple flowers hanging down from it. And my mom said to me, "That is a terrible weed, get it out of here." And I was a little bit sassy and I said, "Oh, weed is just a plant that you don't like. I think it's beautiful." She goes, "Well, okay, you can do whatever you want." That was creeping bellflower. It is one of the worst weeds that I have ever experienced in a garden. And she was right. I should have gotten rid of it because it's almost impossible to get rid of. I still struggle with it. It's absolutely terrible. The same goes for things like Canadian goldenrod, which is actually a native but a very aggressive plant in small cultivated gardens. And so you do have to keep it under control, but there's a lot to keep under control. I mean, you name any plant that has run wild in your garden, and you might feel the same way I do, which is, why didn't I just deal with that properly from the beginning? And the answer is because it's no fun and it's hard work and it stinks. If you can manage it properly and really take a good crack at it once, then kind of just manage it from there, boy, you make a lot less work for yourself over the years. And so that's another one where I really regret not just going after those things when I spot them, when I know they're an issue, and solving them before they become a much bigger problem. And then my last garden regret, at least for the purposes of this list, is taking shortcuts. Anytime I have tried to take the easy way out of something in the garden, I have regretted it because it never works and I have to go back and do it again. And few things make me more angry and more frustrated than having to do the same job multiple times, especially when it's my fault that I didn't do it properly the first time. And my big example of this is preparing garden beds. If you take the easy way out of a garden bed, I guarantee you at some time you're going to be going back and fixing something that you should have done the first time, and it's much harder and much more time consuming and usually more expensive the second time around. You might as well fix your soil while you're starting a garden. Don't bother making a garden in terrible soil. Yeah, soil and amendments, it is expensive and it's not fun. And you really want to do it, because if you have to go back and fix that later on, you never quite fix it right. And really the real way to fix it then is to dig all your plants out, fix your soil, and then replant it. And my gosh, talk about duplicating work. There have been other times when I just wanted to get a job done. Maybe I didn't dig a hole deep enough for a plant, or I didn't take the time to make sure that I had the root flare exposed on a tree when I was planting it. It all ends bad. And I tell you what, some of those things, they still come back to get me, and I get to regret it all over again, because sometimes it takes a while before those catch up with you. So over 23 years of gardening in this place, those are my biggest regrets. So let me know in the comments what regrets you have. And if you want to see a video about the things I've done in this garden that I don't regret, maybe we could do that too. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Here's to regret-free gardening. See you soon.